Preface. Working Class Unity, Union Power. This section begins with an excerpt from the Rolling Stones song Salt of the Earth. Let's drink to the hard-working people, let's drink to the lowly of birth. Raise your glass to the good and the evil, let's drink to the salt of the earth. The story of the Vermont AFL-CIO, which stands for the American Federation of Labor and the Congress of Industrial Organizations, from 2017 to 2023, is one of struggle, experimentation, praxis, and ultimately of showing a way toward a new and revitalized labor movement. In this time, we have advanced union democracy by expanding the number of elected executive board seats and more than doubling the number of rank and file delegates affiliates can send to annual conventions, which is our highest decision-making body. Worked with the building trades to pass responsible contractor. Good grief, sorry. Worked with the building trades to pass responsible contractor ordinances, RCOs, that require prevailing wages on major public construction projects in multiple Vermont cities. Taken money out of lobbying and, with those resources, created a pool of on-call organizers to support our affiliates. Created distance between the neoliberal Democratic Party and ourselves, instead allying with the Democratic Socialist-oriented Vermont Progressive Party, and won real elections along the way. Taken the principled stand of unequivocally supporting Black Lives Matter and become the only AFL-CIO state labor council in the country to call for black self-determination. Not hesitated in becoming the only AFL-CIO state labor council in the United States in 2020 to see through a general strike authorization vote in the event of a neo-fascist Trump coup, and grown from 10,000 AFL-CIO union members in Vermont to over 20,000, thus becoming one of the only states in the nation to see union membership and density actually increase, all while advancing a more radical and militant class agenda. The path we walked was not easy. While our actions have been far-reaching and much needed, we also recognize that our unorthodox approaches have made us powerful enemies along the way, old guard unionists and Democratic Party politicians, to name but two. But much more important than creating conflict with the forces of the status quo, our bottom-up, labor-first approach has gained us the support and the respect of our rank-and-file membership base. Our organizing arc, like many other state labor councils, began with a state of decay, a place where our existence lingered in the shadows of irrelevance. But recognizing that a state of failure, even if familiar and seemingly entrenched, did not have to be our doom, dozens of union leaders from throughout the Great Mountains dared to imagine something different. And it was in this space between daily defeat and self-evident need for change that the United Slate takes form, and in 2019 takes power. With the arrival of United, the Vermont AFL-CIO would come to position itself as the most progressive state labor council in the AFL-CIO. One grounded in class-based politics aiming to amplify the collective voice and power of working people. This book aims to show how an AFL-CIO state labor council in decline reversed such degradation, not through doubling down on the failed strategies of the past, but rather by calling out internal and external institutional failures, by articulating a new working-class left vision of struggle and victory. As the author, I have crafted this book because I strongly feel that our experience, why we did what we did, how we did it, what was weighed when formulating tactics, matters and has a direct bearing on the future of the labor movement well beyond the borders of Vermont. The experiences I write about are all firsthand. For the last 20 years, I have been heavily engaged in the Vermont labor movement, initially as a member and co-founder of the Green Mountain Anarchist Collective and later as an AFL-CIO officer. I served as a Vermont AFL-CIO district vice president, first elected in 2007, and member at large, spanning from 2011 to 2012, during the period of relative decline. And in 2019 and again in 2021, I was elected president as the head of the United Ticket, aiming to deliver us to a period of renaissance. I say this simply to establish that I am no newcomer to the labor movement and, over decades, have seen aspects of how the old ways of doing things have failed and where new approaches have shown promise. These were all experiences that helped inform me and United as we sought the power to make progressive change. This book seeks to map out those experiences, explain why we tried certain approaches, and then evaluate the results, the risks, the rewards, and how we can perhaps set the labor movement down a new course toward the achievement of real working class power. Unless you believe that the decline of the national AFL-CIO and the labor movement is inevitable, is acceptable, or is simply our fate, readers throughout North America should find this work of interest insofar as it represents a new way forward, one of growth, militancy, and democracy within our unions. A discerning reader will note that this book does not put focus on contract negotiations and related outcomes. While it is true that the winning of solid collective bargaining agreements, ones that provide good wages, family-sustaining benefits, safe working conditions, and more democracy on the job, is a cornerstone of what it means to be a labor movement, this is not a story about contracts. Rather, this is a story about seeking to change the political environment, the broad power relations between classes, and the internal structures and priorities of the labor movement itself, which underpinned and give context to the environment within which individual union locals bargain contracts. While I have personally bargained over 100 contracts, being lead union negotiator for the lion's share of these, and while I can recount dozens of successful bargaining fights that resulted in major advances for specific groups of workers, like working with Damian Gilbert and Ron Jacobs and winning 12 weeks of paid FMLA for Burlington City workers in AFSCME 1343, or working with Dan Cornell and gaining $30.50 an hour plus the rate of inflation for DPW workers in Bennington for AFSCME Local 490. Such tales are largely beyond the scope of this work. Even so, if we are to consider the mechanisms and dynamics through which progressive reform within labor can occur, it needs to be plainly stated that union leaders cannot successfully advocate for change until and unless they earn credibility. And here credibility is earned in part through the demonstrated ability to deliver on the bread and butter issues. Thus, the winning of good contracts needs to be understood as not separate from the generalized effort to achieve progressive change. All told, I did not write this book for union officials comfortably making a salary of $200,000 to $500,000 a year who believe things are working out just fine for them and the members be damned. I did not write this book for the old guard or their apologists, nor is this for those who value relationships with politicians and industrialists over those with the rank and file. And it is certainly not for anyone who cannot plainly recognize and admit that 50 plus years of hitching our wagon to the Democratic Party and suppressing union militancy has resulted in anything other than radically reduced union density rates and a diminishing of union and working class rights. And of course, this book is not for those who prefer to use the rhetoric of left unionism while actually supporting the status quo within unions and without. This book is not for you. But for those who do desire a true advancement of the collective interest of union members and the working class, for those who are unafraid to take on the entrenched powers that be, for those union members and leaders who are in it for more than their self-interest and personal rise through the ranks. For those who can dream of a future in which working people, as the great majority of the population, wield the power to define the social, economic, and political climate of our nation and the world, I assert that in our modest way, the Vermont AFL-CIO from 2019, when United took power, up to the present, shows glimmers of how that change can begin to come about. It is for you that this book has been written. I have no doubt in my mind that history will prove us right and that the unions and working class will prevail over the democratic forces of capital, just as we will also prevail over those internal forces that seek to keep us in line. I know that the great trajectory of history aims at a more equitable, more democratic, and more socialist society. But even as history unfolds, we must recognize that it does not do so as something external to ourselves, but rather through the collective action taken by all of us together, willfully, and at each crossroads. Sometimes doing our part comes easy, but most of the time it is hard. The Vermont AFL-CIO is presently seeking to do its part. We are not afraid of giants. This is our story. United, David Van Duesen, President of the Vermont AFL-CIO. All right. Thanks again. We'll dive into Chapter 1 on the next one.